A new study by World Weather Attribution has sounded the alarm on significant harm from human-induced climate change, adding that it's not a future threat but present-day reality. The study comes as the EU's Copernicus climate monitor said 2025 was on course to be a joint second warmest year with 2023. This despite La Niña conditions, which typically are associated with cooler global temperatures. Well, to talk more about this, we can bring in Jean-Pascal Van Ypersele, who's a professor of climatology and environmental sciences at the Catholic University of Louvain. Thank you very much for being with us on France 24. I'd like to start by asking you, if you can break down the climate trends that we saw this year.
Well, the general trend is well known. It's a warming trend, which is due to the burning of fossil fuels and to the deforestation that's unfortunately continuing. It was a little less warm than last year, which broke a record, but still the high level of heat in the system amplified a number of extreme events such as heat waves, droughts, floods, extreme rainfall, and caused a lot of damage in 2025.
And so where are we at in terms of limiting warming as the 1.5 degrees Celsius in line with the Paris Agreement?
Well, for the first time, the average over the last 3 years of the global average temperature broke that limit set in Paris 10 years ago. It doesn't mean it's broken on a climate basis, because usually we define the climate average over at least a 20-year period, but we are heading towards moving above that limit in the coming few years, unfortunately. So this is a very bad sign. It is a sign that countries need to really intensify the effort to reduce the emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases, which are causing this heating of the global system. And this is why climate efforts are really needed.
And that report said that heat waves were the deadliest extreme weather event in 2025. Tell us more about that. Why are they more deadlier than, say, floods or wildfires or other events?
You know, the human body has usual temperature about 37 degrees C and cools itself by perspiring. But when the weather conditions are close to that value, and when the humidity level is also high, it's very difficult for the human body to maintain its basic temperature, its metabolic temperature. And this is impacting a lot of systems in the bodies and causing real health issues and causing death if the temperature is too high. So heat waves are really a problem. As your diagram shows, in South Sudan, for example, the heat wave that they had at the beginning of this year in February was taking place typically once every 1,500 years or so before climate change was there. And now it's likely to take place 1 year out of two. It's becoming much more frequent because of the global warming. And those heat waves are killing more and more people. Just in Europe, they killed 70,000 people in 2003, for example. And this is a place where statistics are available, but many parts of the world, they are not as easily accessible. So in the coming years, we will probably see more and more deadly effects from those heat waves, unfortunately.
Well, on the topic of South Sudan, that report noted that in that country in particular, we see the injustices between different parts of the population and how they're affected by these events, saying that women, for example, because of the types of work that they do, are more exposed to dangerous heat.
Yes, indeed. That's a very common feature, unfortunately, which was highlighted in the COP30 recently in Belém, in Brazil. And that's why the gender action plan in the climate area is so important, because women very often work in the fields, work outside as street vendors, for example, and are much more sensitive because they are outside and they cannot stay in protected air-conditioned space, for example. So indeed, it is quite unfair for women and for children also, which are very sensitive to heat waves in particular and other kinds of extreme events. It's not only heat waves actually. This imbalance, this unfairness is also there for the other extreme events.
Well, let's talk about hurricanes, for example, as we saw in the Caribbean at the end of October, Hurricane Melissa. Even with a relatively high level of preparedness, there was still extreme damage there. What then is the way forward if even certain levels of preparing isn't actually helping people that much?
Well, I think getting prepared still remains very important. Adaptation to climate change, as those measures are called, remains very important, but it's not sufficient because as climate is warming, as extreme events are intensifying, it will become less and less sufficient to adapt and to be prepared. So it really shows once more that's a combination of preparedness and adaptation and mitigation through decreases much faster than those happening now in the emissions of greenhouse gases are absolutely needed. It's a combination of adaptation, preparedness, and mitigation, which will help us to decrease the level of impacts in the future.